So, with Delta Force having been out for just a little under a month now, I think we're starting to get a really good feel for how the game is playing, but also how replayable it will be for the long run. You know, does the package that is Delta Force as a whole right now have what it takes to keep players invested for the long run? I know that this is technically the open beta of the game, and some will say that it's unfair to ask this of Delta Force when the game is technically still early in its development, but on the flip side, let's be real here. Once your game becomes quote-unquote open to the public and is available to players on demand while also offering microtransaction purchases in the game itself, at that point it's basically a soft launch that is more akin to an early access release, which means that, well, you've already released your game. To me, that subjects it to the kinds of questions even when it is an early access game. Players aren't going to judge your game on the promise of what is coming these days. They're just going to judge it on the premise of what is there before them now and whether it's enough to keep them interested. So, does Delta Force hold a package that is going to see it live long into the future and become a staple in the first-person shooter gaming space? And, well, I'm going to be honest with you guys here. Right now, I think it's facing a bit of an uphill battle. And unfortunately, that actually boils down to something that is probably going to take them the longest to fix, being the maps, both from a quality and a quantity perspective. Now, to be clear, and before I go any further, there's a lot going for the game right now that is definitely going to keep players invested for some time. The weapon grind, for example. It's addicting enough at the surface level, and the amount of attachments available to each weapon makes it very easy for me to spend far too much time tweaking all of the multiple weapon builds down to the final details. In case it wasn't clear by now either, I'm talking about the warfare mode only here and not the operations mode. But let's be honest here, the fact that we're enjoying those weapon builds that we're working on and the weapon grind that we have to get through on the same 5 maps every time we boot up the game, that's going to wear a little thin on me. In fact, it already is. In my view, if you're only going to have 5 maps in the game from launch, they need to be some of the best goddamn maps that we've ever played in a first-person shooter game. Absolute home runs across the board that feel enjoyable to play in the long run, but also unique enough to feel different by comparison to each other. Unfortunately, we aren't quite to that level of standard yet, and while maps like Trench Lines and Cracked in particular, in my view, are pretty solid to play on, Shafted, on the other hand, feels a bit like a phone-in of a map by comparison to the rest of the offering, in my opinion. It really has me reacting with the fattest every time I see it load up on my screen. Sometimes it's me just leaving automatically if I catch myself on the defending side of this map. I mean, shit, if I'm being completely honest, guys, anytime I catch myself playing on the defensive side of any of these maps, there's times where I'm even considering leaving outright in the hopes of getting onto the attacking side of the next lobby I end up joining. I have to be in a really good and tolerant mood to play the defensive side on a lot of, if not all of these maps at the moment. Mainly because a lot of the maps and the way their objectives, out of bounds sections, and general layouts are designed can make it for a really boring experience while playing defensive, at least in my opinion. Like, I know that on the defensive side of the map, you're really meant to be playing defensively and not pushing forward in funky ways, but the way that a lot of the maps and the sectors are laid out for defenders really limits any kind of plays that you can make with the game. There's times where you really feel like you're limited just to waiting for the attackers to reach critical mass and gain a bit of ground before you yourself can actually start pushing flanks and playing smart and being creative with your plays. Until then, it kind of does feel like just this war of attrition where you're sitting on a single line of defense and you can't really do anything to deal with opponents that are shooting from their safe zone, of which tends to creep quite deep into your territory as well. Now, in saying that, I don't want to see defenders being able to spawn camp or anything like that, but I'm sure there's ways to afford defenders on a lot of these maps a little bit more flexibility in their play spaces and their ability to manipulate map control, because right now it does feel extremely limiting. But back to the overarching point though, ultimately, it feels like there are only 4 decent maps in the game right now, some of which only feel decent to play from the attacker's side, which means that, for me at least, things are starting to feel pretty dull with the game already, and that sucks because the underlying gameplay of Delta Force is really solid, all things considered. It's one of the more polished shooters that we've actually had a chance to play in a very long time, which is just being let down by the amount of maps available on day dot, among other things. And as we know, that is going to take some time for the developers to sort out. My understanding, based on recent development Q&As, is that one new map is dropping for each game mode with every season, which should put us works on around about a 4-month waiting cycle for every new map to drop. That is going to be a really hard way to go through if you plan on playing this game frequently until then. And again, as much as I enjoy playing on trench lines, on cracked, and on the attacking side of, Threshold and Ascension, it's gonna wear thin, and it's gonna wear thin quickly. Now, that's not to ignore the other issues that are still in the game right now. Things like, the MMR that the game currently employs, throwing players in high ping lobbies, or the fact that every match that I'm playing as of late feels like a tournament where everyone is competing for $1 million prize pool, or the fact that the gunplay with the game's customization system currently allows you to beam players with single full auto bursts at crazy ranges, or the fact that vehicles can be called in indefinitely, which throws all of the balance of attack and defense mode out of whack if you've got a bunch of really passive but well-positioned vehicles in the backlines sniping infantry. Seriously, I was playing a game of Cracked recently where the defending side had 3 mobile APCs at the same time. 3 APCs. At that point, the game was over. There was nothing our engineers could do to deal with what was being put forward there. But I digress. And look, I know I'm complaining a lot here. I get it. And rest assured, I do still enjoy the game at its core and the potential that it carries. All of these are addressable problems, but if Delta Force doesn't address everything quickly, I fear that it will gnaw away at the patience for a fair few players and fast. The MMR issue is something that we've talked about at length before, but that in particular is also something that I fear is going to be a massive sticking point for a lot of people and quickly, especially if we keep getting thrown into high ping lobbies. But returning to the core of this video, the maps in particular, as they currently stand, I feel are going to be something that pushes a lot of players away as the quote-unquote shine of these maps wears off over time. If Delta Force sticks to its current release timeline of 1 new map every few months, I fear that it may be too little too late. But I'm also hoping to be proven wrong here, especially if what they were saying in the lead up to the game's launch is true. Reportedly, the Delta Force developers have been working on content for Season 4 well in advance of the game's release, which suggests to me that some new maps may be in the pipeline and ready to go. X-Defiant and its recent shutdown has shown that holding on to content for the sake of staggering it over time does not work as an effective carrot on the stick approach for gamers if the core offering is limited. Staggering releases is all well and good when the premise of that new content is worth going through the journey to get to it. If you're chasing that carrot over a beautifully mowed and maintained backyard, you're going to continue on the journey. But if you're chasing that same carrot over hot coals the entire time, you're far more likely to give up that chase altogether. And unfortunately, right now, I fear that Delta Force is actually landing itself on hot coals from a perspective of keeping players interested while they stagger that content out over time. But who knows? Maybe my dealings with a bunch of first-person shooters that have failed as of late is adding a pessimistic lens to my view at the moment, and maybe I'm just getting a little bit down in the dumps and down in the weeds at the moment. Let me know in the comment section down below, guys, if you think the current offering of Delta Force is enough to keep the players interested, or if you think the game really needs to add some new content and add it quick to keep people interested. As always, backhanding the like button does go a long way to supporting the channel, and if you're new here, consider subscribing. I've got some really exciting things planned for the new year, guys. Video release tempo may slow down a bit as I experiment with some new things, but I promise you the wait will certainly be worth it. And also come check us out over on our Twitch channel. First link in the description down below. It would be great to have you guys over there with that side of the community too. But until then, guys, take care, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Peace out, guys. Have a good one.